evening. Welcome to Trending at 10 p.m. I'm Vishnu Shom. The global implant scam, an international crisis which has happened right under our noses, is the big focus of this program. After a nearly 36-month-long investigation, 250 journalists from the International Consortium of Investigating Journalists, including the Indian Express, have released their benchmark investigation. The results of the study, according to the Indian Express, which looked at India, show from coronary stents and pacemakers to breast and knee implants, from pelvic meshes to intrauterine devices, almost every medical device is advertised, sold, surgically implanted in a regulatory system that effectively does not exist. In a market where global pharma majors do the hard sell via a dubious nexus with hospitals and doctors. On the show tonight, doctors, specialists and investigative journalists, as we explore what the report says, not just on India, but the world. Let's bring you a couple of highlights of what the report, which has been internationally released, has to say. Almost every medical device advertised, sold and surgically implanted is in a regulatory system that does not exist. Breast implants are done in basement operating theatres of DDA flats in India, in Delhi. There are crowds of patients with botched up device surgeries, often at government hospitals, such as the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Indian regulators did not make public details of recalled devices distributed in India. These are a couple of the main points which have emerged. Well, a few more details of what this International Consortium of Investigative Journalists report is all about. It says that it's called the Implant Files. They are the first ever global analysis of the medical device industry. Now, here's the broad picture. Manufacturers paid at least $1.6 billion to settle charges of corruption since 2008. The report says that governments in countries like Africa, South America and Asia do not regulate medical devices. Faulty medical devices were linked to 1.7 million injuries and nearly 83,000 deaths around the world over the last decade. Doctors often fail to report adverse events. So that's the larger issue that we are looking at. Joining us in the studio with me, Dr. Arun Kumar Agarwal. Thanks very much for being with us. Dr. Shochin Bajaj. Kaunain Sherif is a journalist, a principal correspondent with the Indian Express, somebody who's been looking at this very, very closely and reporting it. Sheetal Ranganathan is Vice President, Life Sciences and Healthcare at a global research and consulting firm. Thank you all very much for being with us. Kaunain, let me come to you first. As far as India is concerned, what was, in your mind, the most hard-hitting and worrying aspect of this investigation?
So let me begin. So the ICIJ Indian Express collaboration. This is one of the collaboration which happens every year. We've looked at the Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, and the Swiss leaks. This time we decided to look at something that affects all of us, and the view was that we will look at the medical device industry. In the Indian Express, the team led by Ritu Sareen, Jai Majumdar and me, we first started looking into the data. So this investigation was very different because for India, we hardly had any data. So then the next step was to look at whether there was any regulation. So if you sort of look at the twin factors, the fact that there is no data and the fact that there is no regulation, this is very different from what was happening in the US. US had a regulator and US has a US FDA data, but India, which is a 5 billion market, neither has any regulation of medical devices nor has any data on the adverse reports. So these are the first two startling facts that come out of this investigation, Vishnu.
And so in terms of statistics or numbers, what were some of the worst aspects of the scam, as it were? What were you able to unearth at a national level? Because I take the point you're mentioning that statistics are hard to come by.
Yeah. So we sort of discovered a small center in Ghaziabad which actually looks into drugs, but was also looking into adverse reports of medical devices, what we call as the IPC. just in the last 1 year, we had 500 adverse event reports. First, we need to understand what is an adverse event report. Adverse event report is the first step to recognize if a device is faulty. So a patient or a physician reports to the regulator if there is an adverse reaction. It could be during the surgery, it could be after the implant, So 500 of these cases were being reported in a small center in Ghaziabad. So this is the first revelation that in fact there is an alarming rise of adverse reactions to the implants.
Yep.
Now let's go deeper into these numbers. Out of the 500, 50% of those are related to stents, coronary artery stents. Second are related to hip and knee implants. And you have the biggest players. You have players like Abbott. You have players like Johnson & Johnson. You have other big players. So these are players who come with FDA license in India. So the second step was, why was clearances being given to these companies? India doesn't have any system in place. We blindly follow the US FDA and the CE mark system. So basically, without any clinical trials in India, the products are given licenses. So basically, we have discovered that in the last 1 year, 500 adverse reports have been reported in India. Although these reports are not from major cities, these are from usually cities not like Bombay or Delhi. These are reports that are coming in from the smaller centers.
Right.
So really, it's most of these events are underreported.
I think that's a very important point. We don't have an idea really of the extent of the numbers. Dr. Agarwal, let me come to you. We have some numbers. In the last decade, the US, in terms of implants, had more than 26,700 recalls. Canada, a small country, population-wise, had more than 8,300. India, with a population of more than 1 billion, had only 14 from the beginning of 2013 through 2017. Why is it so abysmally low?
Vishnu, we have to understand that we are trying to use the word scam. We are trying to understand the need of implants, which is an advancement in the science, medical science, and you realize that what was the status of implant 20 years back. Today, perhaps we are depending in more number of implants for various organs, various parts of the body. It is the outcome of the advancement of the medical science.
I don't think anybody is questioning the use of implants.
Okay.
I'm talking about designs which are untested, doctors getting into a system of working with companies to force implants perhaps when they're not required. We've seen the Johnson & Johnson case. Yes.
I have seen it. I have worked it out. I was part of that.
Yes.
You see, let me take example. I'm not comparing drug with the implant.
No.
Right? But a drug being tested and brought into the market, after 10 years we come to know that there is problems in the drug also. We come to know later on. In implants also, there are various factors. The factors, host factor, what you are looking for, complications. Have you ever thought what are the host factor? I have been implanted, then what are my weaknesses?
Are patients suitably informed about the dangers of implants?
Certainly, that should be. The patient should be informed that we are implanting this. There is a possibility of acceptance. There is something called body immunity.
Okay, Sheetal, let me come to you next. Is it as direct as Dr. Agarwal mentions, that look, everybody is different, every implant is different, and we have made a lot of progress, people cannot do without implants, and that it's not correct to necessarily refer to this as a scam? That's one perspective. The other perspective, based on what hundreds of journalists have been doing, is that these are indiscriminately being distributed on the basis often of flawed designs. Where do you see this entire issue?
True. So first of all, thanks for having me on the show, and I would really like to congratulate Indian Express to have done this study along with the Consortium of Investigative Journalists. I think, Vishnu, to comment on the commercial as well as medical legal angle of it. So if I look at it primarily from the perspective of the manufacturers, and then we can bring in the ecosystem of healthcare providers and the patient. You know, what Dr. Agarwal said is truly dependent on the relationship between a patient and a doctor, which is of trust, as well as you know, the doctor's expertise in being able to take a judgment on whether an implant should be recommended to a patient or not. But when we look at the purely commercial angle to it, you know, as you know, my fellow colleague from Indian Express was saying, you know, there are two things. One, India is a hugely attractive market for device manufacturers, and what makes it attractive is not just the large size. You know, he quoted a number of $5+ billion or so, but also because there is no regulation, there is a free play. So it is a primarily import market where we depend on how the implants have done, you know, in the market in, let's say, the US or Europe, and look at the FDA reports, and all that is needed in India for a device manufacturer to enter is an import license and a registration.
Yep.
You know, the only semblance of regulation that we've had in the market in India has been, say, in the last 2-3 years.
Yes.
When in 2015, you know, an authority was formed, a medical devices authority, and it is as recent as January 2018
yes.
that this authority has made it mandatory for the providers as well as the distributors in the market.
Sheetal, just one sec.
What is called material vigilance.
Correct.
Which is to
and I
in
fact had a question related to this. Sachin, perhaps you can take this question. Now, a World Health Organization study of 2017 showed that there are differing numbering systems for medical devices. There is no standardization. Most countries don't use any system at all. Only 50%, approximately 50% of 174 WHO member states that responded to this survey used any official system to identify devices. In several countries, in nations in Africa, just 28% had them. Is this a problem, that there is no system that knows exactly what is being implanted? What's the situation in India?
Right, Vishnu. First of all, thank you for having me, and I would also like to congratulate Indian Express and ICIJ for doing a wonderful job. I think this is what investigative journalism is all about, and they've done a great job of it. And I look forward to reading all their stories in the next week or so. That will come up, I'm sure. See, I think we need to understand and put it down very simply, break it down. Who are the stakeholders in this entire system? There is no system now, we are seeing, right? There is no regulation. But who are the stakeholders? How can we identify each of them and see what needs to be done? So the first and the biggest stakeholder is the government, of course. The second is the company that produces and sells these implants, so the entire ecosystem of the company and their dealers and everybody. Third is the hospital. And fourth, the doctors and the patients, who are the primary people interacting with the implant procedure. So the government in India and across the world, we've seen it even in highly regulated environments like the US and Australia, these reports are coming out, even Norway. In India, unfortunately, there is no regulation, right? It is just covered under the Drug Act, which is, I think, a stupid thing to do. We've been waiting for a Medical Devices Act for a long time. The government needs to regulate these devices immediately without any waiting period, I think. I think the first question that comes out is, it will affect manufacturers, it will affect the MSME sector. So if
that should not be the concern, it's just the health of the patient.
So we need to do it post-haste. And even if you want to give them time, I think you can give them about a year or so, certifying by QCI voluntarily, like hospitals do with NABH, that's a QCI body. I think that should be the minimum standard.
Sure.
In orthopedic implants, if you see, more than 50% are produced by small scale sectors which are completely unregulated. We don't even know what's going into the patient. So the drug regulator needs to be there immediately, and the government needs to identify these devices, focus them, and club them together with the similar ones. The second, the doctors, the stakeholders need to really open up about what exactly they are doing. If you're going to a doctor now, you are just going to him based on word of mouth recommendations by a friend or a family that this is a very good doctor. You never know how many surgeries is done till date, what has been the complication rate, what has been the recall rate, how many implants have failed, how many have successful.
It's impossible to actually get an accurate measure on this.
So they need to come out.
Okay, just one sec. I want to go back to Kaunen. You know, one of the points that came up in some of the articles that you were doing and your team was doing, breast implants are done in basement operating theatres and DDA flats. At the All India Institute, there is an ever swelling crowd of patients with botched up device surgeries. How bad exactly is it? You know, I mean, is there this carefree system where people are getting into implants because nobody really cares about anything other than making money? That's the bottom line.
Yeah. So Vishnu, coming to your first question on the breast implants, you know, because it's an international collaboration, you know, through the next few days, the stories on breast implant investigation is going to come out in the Indian Express. So I can't really comment on the breast implant investigation. But on the revision surgeries, you know, we discovered that AIIMS has a dedicated revision surgery OPD, which means that, you know, patients from across the countries were lining up at the Premier Institute for botched up surgeries. These surgeries were where for two reasons. First, the surgical errors. The surgical errors may be done by the quacks or done by surgeons who are not well trained. Like in the story, Dr. Yadav, who's a premier surgeon from AIIMS, says that medical device industry has now become like aviation industry. You know, he compared it to aviation industry, that every 2 months there is a change in the model of an implant, like a knee implant. There are 115 models of the knee implant. He says if aeroplane, the technology of an aeroplane is changed, that you will have air crashes every day. So that's what is happening right now in the medical device industry. So that is why you have, out of every 100 patients, 20 patients in this OPD are right now undergoing revision surgeries. This is an alarming rate. And these are people who are coming from UP, who are coming from Haryana, who are coming from Rajasthan. So it's a very alarming situation at AIIMS right now.
I'd like to thank all of you very much for joining us. We're completely out of time on this, but we're going to track this once again. I think the bottom line over here is that we're only getting to the beginning of how bad the situation is in India, on whether it's a design defect of devices, or it's doctors who are not properly trained, or it's a system that somehow lets down the patients. How bad is this? Now, more than 200 journalists around the world were involved in this, and I think many more questions and many more answers need to come. 30 seconds, sir. Yes.
Right. So, the question of medical negligence versus the failure of implant is very important. Not that, as Sheetal said, that in last couple of years the government of India has created a system. There is a system, but that system has to be popularized among medical professionals, amongst the public.
So what if I was to tell you that there is every possibility that Conan and his team of journalists is going to come up with the most shocking statistics in the next couple of days?
I fully agree. And
you know, based on studies which have never been done.
If the implant is,
it's no longer, sir, in this particular case about what the government has done. The question is what has not been done systemically over many years.
Yes.
And I think when we get to the bottom of this, which I'm sure you know, journalists like Conan are actually trying to get around, we will see a situation which is disastrous.
I do appreciate them that they are coming out with something which is very necessary for the society.
Let us wait and see what actually comes. I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us.